very efficiently.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks for answering.
Yeah, I mean, just to take some alternate points of view here, I do think as we develop, private blockchains, change consensus mechanisms, look at alternatives in what we're doing, I think a lot of those can potentially address those those throughput concerns as well. But we got to make sure, remember, we got to have the right solution for the right blockchain problem.
Right. Thanks, Peter, for that. So let me move to the next question. So we are now on use cases specifically with respect to technology and priority in terms of testing. So we asked the bankers, and they said cross-border payments, digital identity management, and clearing and settlement came out as the top use cases. And this is a question for you, Bill. What do you think about this? These three, especially given that you're definitely present in the first part. And what do you think about these three use cases being rated highly in terms of, for testing and application?
Yeah, I mean, I think in particular the first one makes sense. Cross-border payments. I have some stronger issues about identity management, but let me talk about cross-border payments first. I think the idea that you can basically eliminate the financial intermediary in a trustless environment has always been the holy grail of person-to-person or P2P payment. And the beauty of the Bitcoin model is that there's really no difference in peer-to-peer payments or cross-border payments. They're exactly the same thing. Again, the price you pay for massive decentralization is transaction throughput, but at the same time, it's the perfect kind of or ideal use case for a global, decentralized, trustless system. And the challenge is, of course, the on and off ramps, right? So when you're dealing with cross-border payments and P2P payments, the consumers or the businesses that would use the systems ultimately still care about fiat, meaning real currency. So while the movement of digital currency, whether it's Bitcoin or some other asset class that you arbitrarily create, ultimately has to be fungible in some way back to fiat, right? And that's what exchanges do. And in the Bitcoin world, you see cash services like Local Bitcoin or Abra. And those services now are very complex and also actually mandate a modicum of trust because they're basically providing the on and off ramp from the centralized world or the trusted world into the decentralized world. So even there, there's big red flags that people have to be aware of, that there's no holy grail for having a completely trustless, decentralized system, but the use case is still very, very compelling. Identity management is much harder, in my opinion, because at the end of the day, you're always going to have to trust someone because you're still dealing with physical beings, whether it's a person or a company or whatever the identity is that you're packaging and trying to federate. Ultimately, you're still going to have to trust someone, and that trust is going to come with a cost. So trying to build a decentralized, trustless system for identity management is, in my opinion, is going to be extremely difficult at any kind of scale. And for most corporate applications, right, the kind of traditional, RDBMS type of solutions work quite well now. So the third one you mentioned was clearing and settlement. And again, I think that it really comes down to the goal. If your goal is massive decentralization in a trustless environment, I think the blockchain-based solutions like Ethereum are extremely interesting. If the goal is to basically do clearing and settlement across 25 to 50 companies, I'm willing to bet that there's EAI and replication technologies out there via companies like Oracle and TIBCO that probably scale better and are more cost effective because they've been at it for 20 years. So I think you have to really understand the nature of the problem you're trying to solve. But if your goal is massive decentralization in a trustless environment, then I think clearing and settlement via a model like Ethereum has a lot of promise.
Right. That's very interesting. Anybody else has any views on this? Peter or Chris?
Peter here. I mean, I basically agree with a lot of those. I think in terms of establishing identity, I think that I think the problems are there in terms of a system to share identity or build a reputation system. I think is probably where a blockchain and digital identity management work. I think clearing and settlement and sort of the automation of a lot of sort of complex step type systems, like throw trade finance in there as well. I think are areas that we're seeing a lot of innovation in, and people working on that right now.
Okay, thanks. Great. So, in the interest of time, I'm moving on. On the next slide, which talked about investment and readiness. Um, so we asked the banks, where do they think they are in terms of, are they already investing, or they are willing to invest in 2017, or they are not thinking about it. And as you see in the chart, this is what came out. Now, my question to you, specifically to Peter, given your experience of working with banks on this, is that how would you kind of what kind of banks would you classify under innovators and early followers? Are there some trends in terms of geography, in terms of size, or in terms of any other parameter?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of people interested. I mean, in general, I would say bankers all want to be second. No, there's a couple people who don't, they're scared about being first, and nobody wants to be third. In what you have, I think what we're seeing right now is in the U.S. Probably a lot of leading banks, bigger banks, sort of leading through investment and fintech are working on that. But you're also seeing a movement to smaller banks. You have something like CU Ledger, which is a consortium of smaller credit unions, also looking at this. I mean, I think there's some general acknowledgement that this is something people have to pay attention to across the board. So you have people like DTCC spending a lot of time on it. I would say, though, that a lot of the more interesting stuff is happening with foreign banks. We're part of the consortiums in the Middle East, where you have active government involvement, very much pushing the technology. I think you've seen the same thing in China, a little bit in Australia. So I think you're seeing a lot of innovation in that market as well, coming from there. I mean, a lot of these banks, you look at the survey, it says that the banks that are investing are planning to spend at least $1 million, if not more, on that. So I think you have to think about partnerships and who you're working with on what they're doing, because I don't think the banks that can invest in it are doing it alone. The other thing is usually these banks are involved in some sort of network, either with a corresponding bank relationship or with a supply chain or with a network of things that they're trying to work together.
Right, right. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of interest. We have been discussing this with banks pretty much in three different regions. I think a lot of interest, but from an investment perspective, I think only 15 to 20% of the large banks are really setting up teams and investing in technology. That's what also came out from the survey. Moving on, let's discuss about the commercial viability and the use cases. And this question is specifically to you, Chris. When we ask the bankers about the use cases in terms of what do they think are the commercially viable use cases, pretty much the same as they said from a technology readiness perspective. They said cross-border payments, digital identity management, clearing and settlement, and letter of credit process. So I wanted to know from your perspective, what do you think about this?
All of these things are, in my opinion, things that should be easy but aren't. With the example of a cross-border payment, the two ends of that transaction are thinking, to themselves, well, we're just debiting one bank account here and crediting it over there, and the reality is these payments are sent through SWIFT or FedWire or TPANET or any one of these, the myriad of payment messaging systems, and then followed up with the clearinghouses, and that could go through the central banks or it could go through the Bank for International Settlements. So there's so many intermediaries involved in what should be such a simple operation, and it all adds to the frustration of doing a cross-border payment. And all of these other items that were on this list all suffer very similar problems. it's something that you think in your head should be very simple and very quick and very easy, but it's not. And under the hood, you see a mountain of intermediaries that are adding to the costs and the lead time in getting something done, which in I think many people's opinion should be something that we should be able to do on the same day. So we have these onerous, simple tasks that we have to do a lot of, and blockchains are a very easy way of executing these and doing them fast, efficiently, and with next to no cost. So these are very attractive applications, or a high value add operation, I think, in the financial system where blockchains are really going to find their niche.
Mm-hmm. And Chris, from your perspective, your own company, what is that you are using blockchain for?
Sorry, what am I using blockchain for?
Yeah.
Well, in my own business, I use it for cross-border payments because we're using Bitcoin. And, well, I pretty much only use Bitcoin, so that's all I'm using it for at the moment. Okay. And EDC is building Equibit, which is a securities registration system, so we'll be using it for that too.
So is that like a equity crowdfunding platform is it based on blockchain?
Yeah, it's a blockchain securities register. So think of it like the DRS system that ComputerShare provides, that pretty much everybody uses, with the exception of DTC's products. But between the two, I think pretty much all of the world's debt and equity is all registered in those systems. But they are highly centralized and, of course, require huge capital costs to build and maintain. You have a workforce that you need to put on these systems, and you're monitoring it for security 24/7. So we have these centralized databases, which are expensive to build, costly to maintain, and hard to keep safe. So blockchains completely turn this model of doing that completely upside down and say, we're not going to put our database in the back room behind high walls and armed guards. We're going to disseminate the information all over the world, and everybody is going to be pitching in to maintaining the record of ownership. Right.
Peter, from your perspective, across some of these top use cases which came out from the survey, what is that you are seeing, in terms of the work that you are doing with the banks on blockchain?
Well, I mean, I think they're starting to see some real use cases. I think you're starting to see some interesting things develop. As I say, we're going out of POC into minor production on the activities. So you're starting to see some of the ideas develop.
Okay.
And be executed.
Okay. And Bill, specifically to cross-border payment, let's talk a little bit about Abra. Given that it's a very interesting how you're building like a agent network, if I can call it, and maybe I will let you explain how you're using blockchain or Bitcoin blockchain for that.
Yeah, sure. So the idea behind Abra is to have what we call a synthetic currency, or the ability to store dollars, euros, pesos directly on a smartphone, and then be able to move that money peer-to-peer, or use what you called an agent network of individuals to be able to buy and sell those digital dollars on or off your phone. And the question, so that begs a couple of questions. One, how do you store a real digital dollar on a phone in a trustless environment? And then how do you get that digital dollar on or off a phone? So for the first part, we use Bitcoin's built-in scripting and smart contract capabilities via P2SH to enable the synthetic dollar model, right? So really, in English, what that means is you're effectively holding hedged Bitcoin on your phone, and the settlement happens via the Bitcoin blockchain. So you're actually moving Bitcoin around, but you as a consumer don't actually need to understand that you're moving Bitcoin around. You can actually use Abra in Bitcoin as opposed to dollars or euros or pesos, but you don't have to. And then the second, of course, is the liquidity of the system, meaning how do you get the money on or off the phone. And from a consumer perspective, it turns out that the in-person trading of Bitcoin is exploding as a business right now for lots of reasons, and the reasons depend upon which country you're in, from China to Russia, Argentina, Venezuela, U.S., U.K. All of these countries are seeing, up and to the right graphs for in-person OTC-style cash trading for Bitcoin. And Abra basically makes it super easy to create fungible trades between dollars or any fiat currency and Bitcoin in cash. So these Abra tellers or in-person agents are able to make a lot of money effectively by facilitating these trades in person. So that provides liquidity in and out of the Abra wallet in order to make it easier for people who are going to use Abra for P2P type of transactions to get money on and off their phone. So it becomes kind of a win-win situation for everyone. I hope that makes sense.
Interesting. So basically, if I can go to a Abra teller and I can give that person cash, and that will be digitized for me in the form of Bitcoin, and I can send it over your network, and the other guy on the other side in any other country could actually go to a teller and collect cash. Is that what if I would simplify it?
Yes, that's the kind of functional kind of description of what's happening in the system. And then, of course, the question is what's motivating each participant in the chain that you just described, meaning why is the teller willing to do that? Why is the consumer willing to or preferring to do it that way? And what drives the whole ecosystem, right? And it turns out that there's a really good kind of symbiotic relationship between people who are doing kind of cash trading and people who need to do P2P money transfers. And Abra creates kind of the perfect dynamic between those two groups in order to facilitate that kind of transaction.
Very interesting. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll move to the next one. So here we will talk about implementation, and basically we ask the bankers that what are the approaches they think they will need to take to stand out and kind of deploy blockchain. And basically 30% of the respondents said working with consortiums of banks, 28% said collaboration with fintech partners, 22% said collaboration with established tech partners, 20% said being developed by internal team. So, Peter, I think this question is very relevant for you. Could you give your views about from this banker's perspective what they have said, and then if you want to add anything else.
Sure. I mean, I think one of the hardest parts you're going to have is developing the resources to do some of these tasks, and that may be technical resources, but that's also people who have a business understanding of how to apply this. As we know, blockchain is not necessarily the right tool for all cases, but there are a lot of clever things that you can do it. We've talked about Bitcoin, but there are lots of other options in Ethereum and other chains that we're seeing, Corda and Quorum and et cetera, et cetera. So there are a lot of choices to see. I think working at the whole blockchain in a sort of a banking perspective, financial services point of view, is really a sort of an intra-company problem. So working with others is really critical to make this stuff work. So consortiums is obviously the first thing to go look at. I think R3 has been a successful consortium that everyone's heard of. You're starting to see defections, and it comes from speed and purpose and how they work together. What I'm starting to see is a lot of smaller consortiums form where you have banks that are trading partners in some way, shape, or form. In our network, we took a bunch of our customers, all of which have correspondent banking relationships with each other, and they wanted to go work. And they also wanted to work with their trading partners and things like that. So I think you're starting the same thing in the insurance industry where you have, in Europe, I think it's B3I. I think you're starting to see some of the credit unions go together, something I talked about before. I think you're starting to see a lot of people collaborate around that. But I don't want to diminish, the fintech partners or the tech partners. Both of them are important. I saw that Gartner just published their first blockchain consulting proof of concept development services rating system. No magic quadrants or anything like that yet. But I mean, I think that as soon as Gartner starts publishing a report on that type of stuff, then you understand that that it is now a developed industry. I think there's still a lot of camaraderie. I think it's still very much, sort of driven by open source community type of ethos in what they're doing. But there's a lot of ideas and a lot of ideas over the world. So, working with those people are important. What I'm seeing the least of is 100% internal team development, which the survey says is the smallest. I have a couple of banks that are trying to do it completely internally that I've seen. If I'm talking to them, they're getting advice in some way, shape, or form. But in general, I'm saying that most of these people have to either reach out for resources, reach out for ideas, or reach out for people to connect with. Also, I really want to make sure that people are just reading about this. They're really actively doing things and kicking the tires so they understand that. Because I think working in standards bodies, etc., become important because a lot of these networks standards become defined. And I think it's very important to understand what you're getting yourself into. So I think working across consortiums, working with fintech partners, working with established tech partners, all are of value. And as one of those tech partners, we can provide those services, but we're starting to develop them very rapidly.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys think that often it is said about some breakthrough technologies that people tend to underestimate it in the short term, and do you think that is true, or you think that blockchain has gone through at least one hype cycle and now people are asking a lot of questions that can this be done between these two?
I think I think it's both over and under hyped, and so I think there's a little you've got to put a blockchain on it a little bit too much. But I think the revolutionary impact across many industries is still probably undervalued in terms of the longer term impact.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, this is Bill. I'd say thinking about technologies like Ethereum, which in my mind are still kind of really in a beta state, regardless of how they're being used, are super interesting, right? The idea of having a Turing complete language that can work at internet scale for decentralized applications is, it's the holy grail of decentralized computing, and with some of the clearing and trading applications mentioned before, can really enable some interesting things that aren't possible today. And so lots of promise, but you look at how like new applications like the DAO were implemented, which just weren't tested. It also shows the trials and tribulations of trying to build truly decentralized applications that are hard to shut off once you put them out there. So this has to be done with great care, and I think is going to take many more years to work itself out. But I think that using kind of these token-based systems, as an application deployment environment is showing a lot of promise. But again, it's super early days in my opinion.
Yeah, but Bill, so super early days is that 1 to 10 years, 10 to 20 years. I think this is going to happen sooner than later. It may not be mainstream, but I think you're going to start to see, in the next 24 months, some significant production implementations of this stuff.
How you define deployments. If you're talking about truly internet scale decentralized applications, I still think it's going to be primarily startups that drive adoption and implementation. If you're talking about kind of closed network database style implementations of what I guess are being called permission blockchains, which to me are databases, then obviously that will be driven by large corporations. And I think that we're probably in store for another 18 to 24 months of mostly tire kicking and pilots in that area, and I have no idea what would happen beyond that. I just know enough of the companies providing the tech to guess that we're probably in about another 24 months of pilot cycles for that large, that kind of large corporate version of the technology.
Right. Great. Very valid points. Thank you. Let me move to the next topic in the interest of time, and this is about the timeline. So Chris, this question is for you. We asked the survey respondents about what do they think is kind of the timeline in which they see commercial adoption happening. And to some of the points that Bill and Peter just made, what do you think is kind of a realistic timeline to look for commercial adoptions at a banking level for banks?
I think by 2020, which is the most popular response, I would agree. I think by then we're probably going to start seeing some mainstream implementations of Bitcoin or some other kind of blockchain technology. I think right now, with everything that we're seeing in the startup industry in terms of building new financial systems and new services using Bitcoin or some other type of cryptocurrency, the mainstream industry needs to come up with something, and they need to come up with something fast, or they run the risk of being overtaken by startups. And so whether that is, a full-out adoption of Bitcoin as some sort of new reserve asset and settlement system or interbank payment in the system, it could be that. It could be something else entirely. But I think we're at the point now where the big banks and the big institutions have talked long enough about blockchain that they're probably feeling like they have to have something to show at least the B2B level very shortly. So I think 2020 is probably a good target for that. It won't. I don't think it will be what ultimately it is used. But like everybody else, the banks are going to go through their growing pains and figuring out how the best way to implement this technology is, and there'll be some pivots between now and then. But ultimately, I think, at this point, the push to find a mainstream application of this technology is certainly in full swing.
Okay. And Peter, I know you said 24 months. Does that mean 2019 or does it mean 2020? What's your take on it?
If you look at some of the simple things that are happening, I mean, T0's already issuing production stock, so you can say there's a production application. I tend to talk about these permissioned networks as having some value. I think those will happen. Those are somewhat like the steps to the cloud, where you go from private cloud as a stepping stone to a public cloud, virtualization, something like that. I view a lot of these permission networks as somewhere along the way, and if you say the ultimate network is a long ways out. But take a look at the growth of the internet. The internet is really a network of networks with many protocols and standards, and I think those are all things that are need to develop and will happen. But if I'm looking at, when I say within that time period I mentioned, I think commercially viable activity will happen. Maybe not the ultimate end goal, but I think I think viable solutions in a B2B space will be coming out in that time frame.
All right. Okay, so I'll move to the next interesting question, which is about challenges. And we asked the respondents, what do you think about the readiness of the ecosystem? And the challenges that they quoted were really top of the charts was readiness of the ecosystem and need for cooperation between banks, followed by integrating blockchain applications with existing enterprise applications, and lack of governance models. So Bill, let's start with you. What do you think could be the biggest challenges in your mind, and any observation or any comment on this response from the survey respondent?
I think it's the biggest challenge is an acceptance of the difference between kind of traditional technology and what decentralization actually means and implies. I went through this 20 years ago in my Netscape days, and there was this kind of 18-month window where everybody kind of lost their minds and was afraid of the word internet. Hard to believe now, but internet became the rage, and you actually weren't even allowed to say the word internet in a lot of meetings. And we're kind of in this early denial phase, I think, of what decentralization means. And I think the biggest challenge is accepting the fact that internet scale decentralization is a good thing and can solve lots of business problems, but scaling it back, meaning you get all the hard negatives of decentralization in terms of transaction inefficiency, but none of the benefits, doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think it's that kind of just self-awareness and acceptance of the benefits and getting over the fear of the fact that you're losing a certain amount of control in a decentralized environment, but for the betterment of the ecosystem.
Right. Peter, what do you think about this?
Well, I mean, we can make a lot of arguments about whether people need banks and whether this is going to be banking, and they just need banking services, and this will be the type of thing to replace it. I see a lot of banks reacting to that and trying to take control of what they're doing. I think then when you take that sort of the bank's point of view on all of this, having the ecosystem ready, integrating with existing applications as opposed to having it something completely replace it are sort of the problems that they're facing and viewing right now. I think there's a lot of opportunity for innovation, and I think there's a lot of efficiencies that can be removed. So I believe, I believe those are the tools that they face, in addition to sort of understanding what it is. I think also sort of working together across banks is something that's foreign to them in many aspects of what they're doing, and that those are one of the challenges we face when we're engaging with these guys.
Mm-hmm. Chris, any views on this, and specifically to the solution that you are building? What are the challenges that you see?
Yeah, well, I think Bill really hit it on the head, and I wrote an article in the American Banker, which is going over the similar challenge, and so for centuries, the mainstream banking institutions, they had built all of the highways and were guarding all of the on and off ramps, and they got quite comfortable with this business model, and now here comes something where the highway now creates itself, and it's free to get on and off. And so that has kind of thrown them for a loop. And they don't seem, their immediate reaction was, well, how do we get this new thing under our control? And I think that's been the impetus behind a lot of these private blockchains, for better or for worse. And I think really because it is such a paradigm shift towards the banking, the traditional model of business that the payments industry and the clearing industry and the banking industry have been working on for so long, that it's going to take some time, and there's going to need to be almost a cultural shift in the institutions in order to really realize the full potential of the technology. Because I've talked to a couple of different organizations who have done their experiments with some private blockchains, and none of them have been particularly impressed with how well they function versus the stuff that they're using right now. So one question I like to put to the heads of IT is, I ask them, what is the net new value that a permissioned blockchain brings over a shared SQL server? And more often than not, they can't actually ask the question, or they'll go off and talk about what they view the advantages of a permission system are over Bitcoin. So I think they still haven't completely realized how to work with this technology at the moment, and it's a bit of a shame for me because having studied a lot of the history of banking, this sort of peer-to-peer relationship that banks had with each other is how it all got started. We didn't have clearinghouses and central banks, when banking first began. The banks, the buck stopped at the banks, and if they needed to do settlements, they'd pack the gold onto the back of a horse and carriage and carry it over to the next bank that they owed the money to. And it went back and forth like that. And eventually, they got sick of hauling gold around, so they built clearinghouses and central banks. But now we have this great thing called a blockchain that's going to do all of that. and they don't have to worry about a big heavy metal that can be stolen or lost. So there is going to have to be, I think, a cultural shift back to, I think, some of the more traditional banking values, and that's going to take some time. But I think ultimately, the value that an open blockchain provides, like Bitcoin, for example, the value that it brings is just going to eventually be too lucrative for anybody not to adopt. And the companies that do, or the ones that lead the way, are going to become so competitive so quickly that the rest of the industry, whether they like it or not, is going to have to get on board. Otherwise, they run the risk of being left behind.
Just to put a counter out there, I think it all comes down to the cost per transaction, and how do you drive that? And when I say that, that's not necessarily monetary. That's efficiency, opportunity, all of those types of things. I see that the way that you're going to do it cheap, the cheapest is what's probably going to dominate, and so you're going to get some financial network of networks, of which you probably will have several different solutions, some of which, a Bitcoin type of network will be the best thing. I think some of them, you may have a permission network that's the best thing. So I think, as I said, it's probably pretty early in the industry. So these are a lot of things that need to evolve.
Yeah. Well, this is that I'm in agreement with you there, Peter. It's a lot like the layering that I mentioned earlier, where the internet is a network of networks, and Bitcoin isn't going to be the end-all, be-all of all payment systems. There's going to be layers of other payment systems built on top of Bitcoin, and they're all going to be talking to one another, and that's what's going to provide the eventual seamless user experience from the banking and settlement layer all the way down to retail payments.
Right. So there is a more like an objective type question for you guys. Do you think, is there any particular region or country which will take a lead in terms of blockchain adoption? Will it be something that this will happen first in a bigger way in the US or in China? Are you seeing some trend like that?
I'm seeing the Middle East as a very big hotbed. I think China is doing. But I think the first major country that comes up with a digital currency is actually going to be the one, a government fiat digital currency will probably, quickly take the lead in what we're doing. But I think you do have a lot of government-sponsored initiatives, and I think banks worrying about regulation is one of the things that are holding them back. And so if you get that motivation, I think you'll see innovation there. But I think innovation is happening everywhere, and I haven't talked about Africa and South America. I've been there as well, and you see a lot of interesting things happening there as well, and those don't get mentioned as often.
Mm-hmm. So here's kind of I have just two more questions left, and then I'll just open it up. If there is any other things you want to discuss. We have about 8 minutes. So the question is, just more like a summary of what we discussed today is like, blockchain, will it ever be as big as the buzz is there around? So all the hype that we have seen and all the buzz, will it ever be as big as the buzz itself? And from your perspective, each one of you are building technology solutions. I think from your perspective, what do you have to say about it?
My point of view is I hope we stop talking about it at some point in time, but it is pervasive in everything that we do. I mean, I think once you team up Internet of Things with blockchain, value passing of every IP address between each other, I think that will be big. But I hope we just stop talking about it and it just sort of becomes the IP and one of those infrastructure things we're just building solutions on.
Mm-hmm. Bill, what are your thoughts on this? I think
sorry, I had you on mute. So I think that again the short-term applications here are very clear to me, and I'm probably beating a dead horse with that. I think that there's a kind of a second generation of applications that I also find particularly interesting, right? Pay-as-you-go finance combined, with access control and things like that are potential, really interesting applications of Ethereum, right? So you see applications in Kenya, people, with solar lanterns who use their M-Pesa wallet to pay their monthly lease fee for the lantern. And if the lease isn't paid, the lights don't go on. Well, I think that's a really good kind of local application that can be done at internet scale with this kind of decentralized technology. But we need to go through the early steps in order to build. You couldn't build Google and Amazon in 1990; it just wasn't possible. And so I think we need to go through these early steps in order to get there. But the promise of that kind of global scale application is clearly there. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but that's how I'm looking at it, how we're looking at it.
So let me ask you in a different way. So, we have been talking about banking use cases, but as we know, there are plenty of non-banking use cases. For example, some of the true platforms, where there are producers and consumers like Airbnb and Uber, could actually use something like this, especially as say for example, Uber goes driverless, and you have to kind of look at insurance, look at smart contracts, and I think even in the non-financial use cases, as this thing kind of picks up, it is going to overall help. Just the maturity of the technology will help financial services again. So, let's discuss a little bit about, in the last few minutes. Let's discuss a little bit about the non-financial use cases, and what do you guys think? Are the non-banking use cases which you are really kind of attracted to?
Well, I can jump in there. This is Chris. One particular blockchain, which is a non-banking system that I find particularly interesting, is called storage. And storage, if anybody in the audience has ever watched the TV show Silicon Valley, they're gonna already know quite a bit about what storage is. But in Silicon Valley, this company had built a peer-to-peer Dropbox type application with an extreme compression technology. Now, storage doesn't have the compression technology, but it is a peer-to-peer cloud storage system. So just like your Google Drive or your Dropbox or your Microsoft Cloud, storage is an app that you can put on your computer, and it gives you a folder as big as you want to pay for. And you can use it just like any other cloud file server. But it's all peer-to-peer, and all the traffic routed over the system is all completely encrypted, so the people who are storing your data for you couldn't open it and see it even if they wanted to. And the people, the storage is coming from thousands or millions of people all over the world with surplus hard drive space that are they're emptying it up into the system in return for payment for you're basically leasing other people's hard drives, and it has its own native token, and so far it's working quite well.
Right. Peter and Bill, any non-financial use cases you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, at Infosys, we've got 19 POCs working in non-financial use cases right now. Everything from some digital rights management use cases to a lot of supply chain, pharmaceutical test data to, manufacturing, drawing, provenance use cases. I think there are a lot of ideas. I think, the challenge is always finding out why should you use the blockchain, why is it better than the database, etc. But we're seeing a lot of interest now in these other markets, and for every one of the market segments that we say, we're having at least a couple of discussions from our customers on blockchain use cases, and we're building those out.
Sure. Okay. Great. I would, we have only 1 or 2 minutes left. So let me first thank each one of you. Thanks, Chris, Bill, and Peter, for spending time today with us and sharing some of your valuable insights. We are going to actually follow up with the audience who joined us today. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll follow up with an email and sharing some of the insights in terms of the report, some of the findings, as well as some of the other material that we would like to share with you. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks to the panel again, and you have a good day or good night depending on where you are.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everyone. Bye.